Hey, what's up you guys, it's IAmTheLionRider, and in today's video we are back in Ocean State Zoo, picking it up where we last left off, minus about 3 hours of work. So, you might be like, what are you even talking about? What? Like, I thought we just made the otter habitat. And that is technically true, because that's where I am choosing to pick up from. But the reality of the situation is, I actually built an entire habitat prior to this one. And you might be like, wait, what? What do you even, what do you mean? So, if you actually recently saw my How You Can Join ZSU server video, you may have seen that there was a time-lapse in the background of that video. And you might have been like, wait, is he just starting Ocean State's next build, like, in this video? And yes and no. So the reason I included that build in there was to kind of memorialize what was essentially the original version of this build that we're doing in today's video, which is the American Alligator build. So in that video, you may have seen I pretty much did a whole kind of elaborate build that was like a kind of bayou swamp town type thing for my American alligators. And basically the reason why it is scrapped is because that build, in my opinion, was just too elaborate for what I was going for with Ocean State. It wasn't matching the vibe that I wanted from this zoo in particular. And so ultimately I made the decision about 3 hours into the build to just scrap the whole thing. I was actually in a call with Leaf and Sib and stuff, and I was like, guys, I'm just not feeling this at all. And so ultimately what I ended up doing was just scrapping the whole thing. And so luckily, if you saw that video, you may actually, be able to see the full time lapse uninterrupted. Similarly, I actually think for my Pride members, I will make it an exclusive video to see the entirety of the time lapse uninterrupted without, the ZSU stuff. If you want to check that out. But ultimately, there is a reason I scrapped it, and it's just I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling the habitat I was creating. I was trying to replicate kind of stuff that, my buddies like Drew and Estan have done with like Beyond Wolf Nature Preserve, like doing the kind of bayou swamp shack idea. But that's just not usually how I am when it comes to building. I like to go a lot more realistic, and I like my fantasy stuff, but like I'm just not very good at like that sort of bayou swamp, vibe, which is funny because that's, what everyone else seems to like be really good at in the community, but I'm just apparently not very good at it. So ultimately I scrapped the whole thing, and then I went a bit more reliant on realism. And so, as you may know from the, past episodes of Ocean State and stuff, Ocean State is a giant collaboration of a combination of all of the New England zoos combined. And so you may have seen I had some inspiration from Buttonwood and Capron and Roger Williams and Stone and stuff in some of my past builds. And I wanted to give some love to some of the other zoos that are kind of on the outskirts. So I actually, for this specific habitat, took a lot of inspiration, pretty much replicating it almost one-to-one from Beardsley Zoo, which is in Connecticut. So they are closer to New York than they are to like me or anything. And so I have personally never been there. I really want to go very soon. Obviously it's winter now, so it's a bit of a tougher sell, and not to mention the fact that like I want to say 2.5 hour drive, and ultimately Beardsley has not a ton of new animals for me. They have a Yakari Cayman, which is very cool, and I do want to see that Yakari Cayman, but the majority of other animals are just, it's roughly a zoo the same size as like Capron or something. And I can tell you, if you drive an hour to go to Capron, sometimes it's still like, oh, cool. And I'm done with the zoo in less than 20 minutes. So now what? And so I really don't want to do that, going into Beardsley, because I'll be making a 2 to 3 times the, length trip to go there. So I think ultimately, when I eventually go to Beardsley, I have agreed I'm going to try to do Maritime Aquarium, an aquarium I've never been to, which is relatively close, like 15 minutes from Beardsley as well. But I did actually really like, because I love zoos with street view. So if you have a street view of your zoo, you're immediately like, you get a lot of brownie points in my book. And Beardsley has an entire walkthrough of their entire zoo, minus the indoor buildings and stuff. But I really liked their alligator habitat. So their alligator habitat is basically, you know, no different than most other alligator habitats in New England. It's a pond, obviously, like it's an alligator pond. But what they do have is a very loose amount of theming where it is like a bayou shack, but it's like a single building and it's not that intrusive or anything. And I really like that. I actually also want to highlight what I'm doing right now, which is a technique I actually kind of accidentally learned from working on Capron's lion enclosure. But if you use the decal moss pieces, they actually work incredibly well as like that kind of really textured concrete that you would get from like a faux, you know, concrete pool or something, or rockwork or something. And so I actually wanted to put that along the edges of what this is going to be, which is ultimately going to be the alligator pool. And it worked out really well. I like the like cracks and decals and stuff, specifically for stuff like this. I know a lot of people are using them on the sides of buildings and stuff, which is great and all, but I really like using them to add like a lot of like grunge texture and realistic, you know, detailing for just like concrete. Like it's actually really, really good for that sort of stuff. And so ultimately, you know, most of it's buried underwater, but it actually worked out really well. And I really enjoyed, you know, working on this habitat in that regard. And so I could definitely tell, just honestly replicating Beardsley's, you know, bayou shack was a lot more appealing to me than, you know, trying to figure out what, you know, how do I make this my own unique bayou town, but also make it within a budget. It was just ultimately, you know, not the best. So what I liked about, you know, just copying Beardsley entirely was they already have the, you know, what a budget shack would look like. So I appreciated that. And then to some extent, I also kind of combined it with some things from like Shades of Nature, because Shades of Nature at Roger Williams also had a very light theming with the Bayou theme, but they, you know, obviously have, you know, closed it down since the, you know, very, very short, brief time that Shades of Nature was open. I hope it comes back next year. It was really, really good, but obviously when they made it a seasonal, you know, kind of thing, it wasn't the best. Similarly, I'm also using Leaf's Outback Pack a lot for this build because he actually did have quite a bit of really good pieces and stuff. The Outback Pack, I know people want it, and I understand why, because there's a lot of really good little pieces, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to use it right now, you know, when the public can't. Because it is really, really good for like a lot of little things. It's kind of like the Safari Pack in usability, where just the wood textures alone are like, just, you gotta love them. You can kind of see them. Actually, I used them for the dock and the pier and stuff, and eventually the viewing gallery. I think it worked out really well. And then I'm actually using a thing that I usually do not like, which is the Arctic wood. I understand why people love the Arctic Pack because, oh, look at how great the wood is. And the wood is a really good texture. Going for specifically something like this, if you were going for specifically like a worn down wooden shack, it works very well. But most other builds, like, it would have been nice if it was FlexiColor because it could be more versatile that way. But I don't think it's bad. But as you can see right now, I'm using that Outback wood, and like I said, it works really, really well for getting that kind of like realistic, muted wood texture. I really, really enjoy it, and I think you guys are going to love that soon. I'm going to just try to bully Leaf into releasing it already. I think it's been long enough. He's been hyping it up for months now. But I guess the big thing that I wanted to talk about in today's video was the real alligator fiasco that kind of occurred during the entire, you know, process of the last few weeks. So, as you guys know, since the very first episode of, you know, my ZSU series with Ocean State, I have basically said, here are the animals that I have, and here are the animals that, you know, I'm going to try to get, and I'll let you know when things change. And from the get-go, I said, I have an American Alligator male, correct? Well, apparently I was very stupid and didn't actually include the American Alligator in my initial request for my initial 15 animals. So it turns out that maybe during the negotiation process of my, application for ZSU, I must have deleted the American alligator. And so when I signed up, I only signed up with 14 species. And so this entire time, I didn't realize I didn't actually have an American alligator. So, funny enough, like, I mentioned it in my first episode, the entrance of Ocean State has an alligator sign on it. Internally, I have a kind of like group chat with some of my close friends and stuff who want to do like some like, breeding groups and stuff like that. And they even have in their like, my buddy Forge made like an Excel spreadsheet of like our zoos with like all of our animal names and stuff. And in that spreadsheet, he even includes Nick has one male American alligator named Gus, which, by the way, that is his name. Funny story about that I'll get into in a little bit, but basically, long story short, we had all of this evidence that I have American alligators, but it wasn't until they added the brand new enclosure like system to the bot that I realized, oh, I don't actually have an American alligator on my list. Now, luckily, I talked to Coda and a few of the other mods and stuff, and they were all super understanding about it. They're like, honestly, yeah, we see that you clearly signed up with 14 instead of 15 species. You wanted an American alligator male? Sure, we don't care. Because ultimately, yeah, it's not a huge ask because American alligators are like, they're barely a zoo animal that's really that sought after. They're so common with sign-up species that they were totally fine just like giving me the American alligator that I wanted from the get-go. I was the one that was at fault for apparently deleting it when they approved my request. So luckily everything is rectified, and now we can actually justify this entire build for Gus, our American alligator male. So you might be like, where did you come up with the name? So I was actually in a Discord call with some of the other community members from the ZSU, and basically we all just started talking about like generic animal names or something. And then I was like, yeah, most crocodile parks and stuff, they always just have that big male, and his name is usually like Gus or something. And then a few of the Europeans started laughing at me. And they're like, oh, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh, yeah, it's just like a common thing. And they're like, okay, well, now the next American alligator habitat someone does, they need to name it Gus. And that just happened to be mine. So it just happened to be me making the next nearest American alligator habitat. And so I went with Gus. So I have a big male. His name's Gus. He doesn't have a partner or anything. I don't really think I want to breed them either, to be honest, because ultimately I'm not really, I don't want to breed everything. I'm a mammal guy myself, and like I like reptiles at like a base level, but American alligators are solitary creatures anyway. They can be in large groups, but like I don't want to make a crocodile farm. Like, my buddy Crocs already has that sort of thing. So I'm fine with just my one single American alligator that can just be out during the spring and summer months, and then it goes in during the autumn and winter inside, and we call it a day. Like, I think that's perfectly fine for me, and I think it works out really, really well. And yeah, so that's kind of my take on the whole thing. Is I am fine and content with just a single American alligator in my zoo. Now, that being said, I am clearly going for a very Everglades-esque, bayou shack theme, which is very, very common with alligators, obviously. Like, I think pretty much every American alligator habitat ever has this kind of, Florida bayou shack thing. But a thing that I also find extremely common, especially in New England with our alligator enclosures, is duckweed. And so you can see me placing it down now, because for whatever reason, Planet Zoo does not have duckweed. We have a bunch of other like aquatic wetlands foliage, whether it be lily pads or cattails or whatever, but we don't actually have duckweed, and it really bothered me because a lot of people have tried to make examples of like fake duckweed using the moss decals and stuff, but the alligators can climb on them. So ultimately what I ended up doing, and this was a actually huge portion of why I made the North America pack, was just to add a flat decal-like object of duckweed that the animals could walk or like swim through. And so that's ultimately what you're seeing right now, is me just filling the habitat with duckweed, which is like, if anyone isn't aware of what it is, it's just this neon green plant that grows really, really rapidly in swamps and lakes and stuff. And it was just a thing that, again, most alligator habitats around here, at least, whether that be Stone or Southwicks or whatever, they just have it filling the whole pool. So I thought it would only be appropriate to just have it, you know, in my zoo. So it was definitely a thing that I definitely wanted to include. And so ultimately I just said, I'm just going to make it. And that is, I know I've said this time and time again, that has been my new, you know, lease on life when it comes to Planet Zoo, is if the game doesn't have it, I'll just add it. And I'm just doing that. And that's all I'm doing now, is if the game doesn't have it and I really want it, I'll just mod it myself. And that has been, you know, really good, because it's obviously helped a lot of people other than me, because I obviously will then release the mods and stuff. But I think it worked out really, really well. I also just really love this overhang. This is also, I copied the architecture from Beardsley, and they have a really cool, like, little viewing gallery for the alligator, so I really like that as well. But, you know, we're kind of, you know, coming up on the end of the habitat. I do a lot of, like, kind of tertiary work around the outskirts of the perimeter of the habitat. But ultimately, what I was interested in with this area is I don't know where I want to go from it, because unfortunately the way the layout of this alligator habitat, and the otter to some extent as well, works, it's breaking my rule of circuitry with zoos, and I don't like that, because I don't like zoos that make you backtrack, and currently this technically makes you backtrack from where I want to expand the rest of the zoo outward to. And so I don't know if in the future the otters and alligators are going to move or what, and then maybe this will become just a big backstage area or something like that. But I'm not sure if long term I will keep these habitats where they are, because to some extent I do have a mountain lion. And so what I was almost debating is doing like an Everglades area, not too dissimilar to some zoos that are in Florida, like Zoo Tampa and stuff, where they have just dedicated, like, you know, Florida sections. And so I was thinking maybe I could do that with the alligator and the mountain lion, but to represent the Florida panther. But I'm not sure, because the mountain lion is kind of my big mascot animal, and I want to make sure I do that habitat justice. So hopefully, you know, fingers crossed, I will be able to, you know, figure that one out, because I think that could be cool having them near each other, but I also don't like this particular location of the build. But, you know, as you can see, I'm using a lot of the little details I added from the, like, safari pack and a few other packs or whatever to get, like, some signage and crates and stuff. I actually used the crocodile sign from the safari pack to represent alligators, and I think it actually worked really well as, like, almost like a keep out sign. But, you know, I think it works pretty well. Like, it gives me the vibe that I wanted to go for from the original idea of, like, the Bayou Swamp, but, you know, it's a bit more tame. I added this alligator sign from the North America pack. I'm not sure if I'm going to particularly keep it. I think I'm probably going to eventually do custom signage throughout the whole zoo, because I do like doing custom signage. But for now, I thought it was a fine little decoration. And so that pretty much wraps up the entire habitat. So now ultimately what I end up doing is just kind of filling out the surrounding forest area with a bunch of foliage. So with that being said, thank you all for watching today's episode of Ocean State Zoo. And I'd like to introduce you to Gus the American Alligator. So thank you all for watching, and as always, make sure to check out the rest of the episodes of Ocean State if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.